Good afternoon and most welcome to the first outdoor lecture. We have a sunny day here a bit south of Gothenburg, and this is an industrial house from the early 19th century. Early 20th century or late 19th century, I guess. It has been abandoned and then renovated to be a sort of antiquity shop area. There's also a restaurant and some cafes. And I hope you can see the view is quite lovely from here. And I managed to find a wind-free covered area here in the corner. And if I clocked the sun correct, I'll have sun all the lecture through. We will continue with The World of Perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. I'll continue where I left off at 14:10. Let's get into second paragraph on page 50. The geometrical properties of the object would remain the same after the move. We were talking about time and space. That no matter where you moved an object, it would remain the same. Were it not for the variation in physical conditions to which it is also subject. Or so it was assumed in classical science. Everything changes if with the advent of so-called non-Euclidean geometry, we come to think of space itself as curved. Sorry. And use this to explain how things can change by simply being moved. Thus space is composed of a variety of different regions and dimensions, which can no longer be thought of as interchangeable, and which affect certain changes in the bodies which move around within them. Instead of a world in which the distinction between identity and change is clearly defined, with each being attributed to a different principle, with each being attributed to a different principle. We have a world in which objects cannot be considered to be entirely self-identical. It's very important. One in which it seems as though form and content are mixed, the boundary between them blurred. Such a world lacks the rigid framework once provided by the uniform space of Euclid. Bit chilly, sorry, I don't have to put my hat on. We can no longer draw an absolute distinction between space and the things which occupy it, nor indeed between the pure idea of space and the concrete spectacle it presents to our senses. It's intriguing that findings of science should coincide with those of modern painting. classical doctrine distinguishes between outline and color. The artist draws the spatial pattern of the object before filling it with color. Cézanne, by contrast, remarked that as soon as you paint, you draw. By which he meant that neither in the world as we perceive it, nor in the picture, which is an expression of the world, can we distinguish absolutely between on the one hand the outline or shape of the object, and on the other the point where colors end up or fade. That play of color, which must necessarily encompass all that there is, the object shape, its particular color, its physiognomy, and its relation to neighboring objects. Cézanne strives to give birth to the outline and shape of objects in the same way that nature does when we look at them, through the arrangements of colors. This is why when he paints an apple and renders its colored texture with unfailing patience, it ends up swelling and bursting free from the confines of well-behaved draftsmanship. In this drive to rediscover the world as we apprehend it in lived experience, all the precautions of classical art fall by the wayside. According to classical doctrine, painting is based on perspective. This means that when a painter is confronted by, for example, a landscape, he chooses to depict on his canvas an entirely conventional representation of what he sees. He sees the nearby tree. Then he directs his gaze further into the distance, to the road, before finally looking to the horizon. The apparent dimensions of the other objects change each time he stares at a different point. On the canvas, he arranges things such that what he represents is no more than a compromise between these various different visual impressions. He strives to find a common denominator to all these perceptions by rendering each object not with the size, colors, and aspect it presents when the painter fixes it in his gaze. But rather with a conventional size and aspect that it would present in a gaze directed at a particular vanishing point on the horizon. A point in relation to which the landscape is then arranged along lines running from the painter to the horizon. Landscapes painted in this way have a peaceful look. An air of respectful decency, which comes of their being held beneath a gaze fixed at infinity. Sorry. They remain at a distance and do not involve the viewer. They are polite company. The gaze passes without hindrance over a landscape which offers no resistance to this supremely easy movement. But this is not how the world appears when we encounter it in perception. When our gaze travels over what lies before us, at every moment we are forced to adopt a certain point of view, and these successive snapshots of any given area of the landscape cannot be superimposed one upon the other. It is only by interrupting the normal process of seeing that the painter succeeds in mastering this series of visual impressions and extracting a single unchanging landscape from them. Often he will close one eye and measure the apparent size of a particular detail with his pencil, thereby altering it. By subjecting all such details to this analytical vision, he fashions on the canvas a representation of the landscape which does not correspond to any of the three visual impressions. This controls the movement of their unfolding, yet also kills their trembling life. If many painters since Cézanne have refused to follow the law of geometrical perspective, this is because they have sought to recapture and reproduce before our very eyes the birth of the landscape. They have been reluctant to settle for an analytical overview and have striven to recapture the feel of perceptual experience itself. Thus, different areas of their paintings are seen from different points of view. The lazy viewer will see errors of perspective here, while those who look closely will get the feel of a world in which no two objects are seen simultaneously. A world in which regions of space are separated by the time it takes to move our gaze from one to the other. A world in which being is not given, but rather emerges over time. This is very pertinent. It is not directly given or static. It takes time. It develops. It's a process. Verbal. Thus, space is no longer a medium of simultaneous objects capable of being apprehended by an absolute observer who is equally close to them all. A medium without point of view. Without body and without spatial position. In sum, the medium of pure intellect. As Jean-Paul Hahn remarked recently, the space of modern painting is space which the heart feels. Space in which we two are located. Space which is close to us and with which we are organically connected. Paul Hahn added, it may well be that in an age devoted to technical measurement and, as it were, consumed by quantity, the Cubist painter is quietly celebrating. In a space attuned more to the heart than the intellect, the marriage and reconciliation of man with the world. In the footsteps of science and painting, philosophy and, above all, psychology seem to have woken up to the fact that our relationship to space is not that of a pure, disembodied subject to a distant object. But rather that of a being which dwells in a space relating to its natural habitat. This helps us to understand the famous optical illusion noted by Malebranche. When the moon is still on the horizon, it appears to be much larger than at its zenith. Malebranche assumed that human perception by some process of reasoning overestimates the size of the planet. If we look at it through a cardboard tube or the cover of a matchbox, the illusion disappears. So it is caused by the fact that when the moon first appears, we glimpse it above the fields, walls and trees. This vast array of intervening objects makes us aware of being at so great a distance, from which we conclude that in order to look as big as it does, notwithstanding this distance, the moon must indeed be very large. On this account, the perceiving subject is akin to the scientist who deliberates, assesses, and concludes, and the size we perceive is in fact the size we judge. This is not how most of today's psychologists understand the illusion of the moon on the horizon. This is not how most of today's psychologists understand the illusion of the moon on the horizon. Systematic experimentation has allowed them to discover that it is generally true of our field of vision that the apparent size of objects on the horizontal plane is remarkably constant. Whereas they very quickly get smaller on the vertical plane. This is most likely to be because for us beings who walk upon the earth, the horizontal plane is where our most important movements and activities take place. Thus, what Malebranche attributed to the activity of a pure intellect, psychologists of this school put down to a natural property of our perceptual field. That of embodied beings who are forced to move about upon the surface of the earth. In psychology, as in geometry, the notion of a single unified space entirely open to a disembodied intellect has been replaced by the idea of a space which consists of different regions and has certain privileged directions. These are closely related to our distinctive bodily features and our situation as beings thrown into the world. Here, for the first time, we come across the idea that rather than a mind and a body, man is mind with a body. A being who can only get to the truth of things because its body is, as it were, embedded in those things. We shall see in the next lecture that this is not only true of space, but more generally of all external objects. We can only gain access to them through our body. Clothed in human qualities, they too are a combination of mind and body. I'll make a little summary here. It's interesting to note that psychology, and in the psychology of perception, a disembodied perceiver is reinforced. Seeing the world as a Brunelleschi central perspective, and the intellect purely flying around without any qualities of its own at all. It also reminds me of, once more, the good fellow Ian McGilchrist. For the left hemisphere, in a possible case of a hemorrhage, tumor, stroke, or accident, deprived of the right hemisphere, see the whole world as disembodied, almost like Kant. Having qualities out there. All these qualities are absolutely disjunct to oneself. In that vision, the self is a transparent membrane to the outer reality. Absolutely passive. Just taking in bits of information in a positive way, ignoring absence. Or, as in the James Locke version, in two aspects. The first one being the world out there with extensions and masses and lengths, depths. The second being something that we project, but also without any possibility of changing it. Colors, surfaces, feelings, tactile sense. For some mad reason, tactile sense according to Locke, was not out there. So the edginess of rocks is not in reality, but mass and length, breadth, depth are. It's, I think, quite paradoxical in itself. All these solutions have severe limitations. They lead to irredeemably to reductio in absurdum, infinite regress. No exception. Psychology, sociology, anthropology, ethnology, science of cognition until recently, neurology until 2 decades ago, physics until 1 century ago, they all started in this disembodied, non-real way. And in the same pace as we become unreal, transparent, sponges for perception of reality, also reality become unreal. Plagued by infinite regress and the misunderstanding of perception, experience and knowledge. Make presencing impossible. We automatically, by habit, blocking it out. It is being in the left hemisphere mood, tensed, trying to grasp, just as in the depiction of the painter before Cézanne, trying to put the world in the central perspective. Arranging things accordingly to pre-made classical laws and initial conditions, thereby ridding it of all life. No longer animate, it becomes the dead substance of reductionism. And we acquire the habit of blocking ourselves out, our bodies, our connection to reality. And the right hemisphere of proprioception. Time becomes picoseconds.